Sorry.
No, that's okay. I just wasn't sure if it was a glitch on the microphone's part.
You're all ready.
All right. Noah, can you hear us?
I can.
All right. So we're going to get started. We'll call the meeting to order, 6:32. First order of business is approving the minutes. Does anyone have any comments on the minutes of June 26th?
I don't comment.
No. So we're not going to be, it's a work session for the CPAC, so we're not going to take any comments until the end.
Okay. I make a motion to accept the minutes.
A second.
All in favor?
Aye.
It's approved. The minutes from August 21st.
Make a motion to accept them.
I'll second.
All in favor?
I'll abstain. I wasn't at the 21st. I was abstaining.
Minutes from August 28th.
Make a motion to accept them.
A second.
All in favor?
Aye.
And still abstaining, right?
Yep. Yeah, I wasn't there.
So there's the comment log has been updated online, and so everyone can see it. We've received, let's see, what was the grand total? Oh, it's not on here. We received quite a few comments, which is great.
185.
Thank you, Coco. 185 comments, so we're just going to start going through those today. Comments close on the 15th, so if we receive any comments after today for the chapters that we go over, we circle back to them. So future CPAC meeting dates, we surveyed the group, and I have the 17th as a date that we can get a quorum. I have Sean, Wendy, John, and Joanne. I have the 20th with Rebecca, Wendy, John, and Joanne. Can you do the 20th?
The 20th is a Friday, right?
Correct.
Yes, I can do that.
And then potentially the 23rd. Wendy, I know you were a question mark, so.
I think I'm okay, unless work calls me in, but it looks good
Okay.
so
So
far.
then we'll pencil in the 23rd and we'll confirm as it gets closer.
This is October. isn't it?
October, yeah. So I have Rebecca, John, Joanne, and Wendy potentially on the 23rd.
Are we saying all at 6 or 6:30? 6:30 AC? Yeah. So are we meeting on all these dates?
If we can, yeah, I'd love to.
Yeah, it's a lot to go through.
Yeah. And I want to do it while it's kind of fresh. Okay.
Great.
So we're just going to start going through the comments. Noah's online, so that if we have any questions, we can talk with him. He can give us his feedback on things as well. So I wanted to start with, we have a summary that the consultants did of the different boards, and I have the boards here. So I figured we could kind of just go through them directly.
You want to do it chapter by
We're
chapter
gonna
and just
do-
hold everything?
Yeah, we're going to do chapter by chapter. So we're going to start with chapter 1 and the vision statement. We'll go through that. We'll be very systematic about it instead of
Right.
jumping around. I don't want to confuse people.
Much less us.
Yeah, I just think we'll be more comprehensive if we do it that way. The first comment we had on this board was someone underlined the vision statement and said, where is this? I don't think they understood that they were reading the vision statement.
Yeah.
So I think that was just a confusion on the process. Discuss that. Guiding principles 1 and 2 seem to have approval. I don't have any red comments on there. The third one, maintain a vibrant year-round island community that meets residents' economic and social needs. That had some
It's 50/50.
50-50 split. And the comments that seem to be associated with that one are that while the guiding principle 3 is important, it fails to consider the needs of other aspects of our community It proclaims that the comp plan should only focus on the year-round residents. It sets the wrong tone.
So,
Yeah, so I had a suggestion, BJ, I thought, what we could do is where it says maintain a vibrant year-round island community that meets the residents' need. Instead, do a vibrant year-round island community for all that meets residents' economics and social needs. Unless there's,
The idea being that a vibrant year-round community serves and works for the part-time community, be it part-time resident, tourism, it's the year-round community that serves the dinners and mans the police and they serve. Can't imagine this community as a vacation haven without those people. So it's the idea to say that vibrant year-round community, by sustaining it, you are sustaining everyone who wants to come here.
I'm not sure if that's too simplistic of a solution, but it seems like it might kind of.
on a vision statement, I don't think you really want to be like listing the summer residents,
Right.
weekend visitors, that trip, it gets,
Just want it to be
you
inclusive.
want to make sure that it's
Right.
for everyone.
Right,
Right.
because that's kind of the intention of it.
That we're intertwined. And that's
Right.
the vision of the community, is that we are all intertwined. Yeah, okay, good.
You're adding for all.
For all, yeah.
That's good.
That's kind of how I interpreted it to start with, but
Yeah.
You know, some people,
Or someone could be concerned.
everyone's gotten very uber sensitive on some of these words, so.
yeah, if someone has better language, I mean,
Yeah.
that works
I mean,
for now.
Yeah.
And Noah's
So
here.
unless
Wait a minute,
someone
Noah wants to speak.
Noah, you have something?
No, I mean, it's hard to say exactly. I understand the kind of the thrust of it, but I guess let me see what you write and if I have suggestions, but I think I generally understand what you're trying to do. It's just hard to kind of right now kind of say exactly what the wording would be. But just as far as just moving forward, are you kind of I'm kind of taking notes on the side, but are you kind of the official note taker? And then I'll just pull in what
And
you have.
Coco.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm taking notes. I can share my screen if that's helpful for everybody. I'm taking notes on the Drive document.
Okay. Yeah, that might be helpful.
I feel like you could almost just strike out year round, and for that first sentence there,
That's what I was
just
gonna say.
maintain a
just
vibrant island community.
Wow,
That means
Yeah, that's probably better.
residents.
that's even better.
Then
I
it-
mean, farther on, it kind of talks about the year-round infrastructure that you need to help do that, the school and the community services, but up front, we just want an island community.
Yeah.
Yeah, great. Doing that barbecue.
Figuring out where my strike through went. The next comment that we got was that the comp plan should take into account the unique problems of seasonal economy, including housing problems of seasonal employees. That we can probably talk about more in the housing chapter. Need to address the problem of seasonal employee housing. We'll talk about that in housing chapter. Special permits for oversized homes.
Overpriced, I think it is, no? Can
I
you
think it's
tell?
oversized,
Oh, okay,
S-I-Z-E-D.
all right.
Homes, not compliant with the code. So we'll talk about that in the
Well,
housing chapter.
And that's discussed in housing, yeah.
So some of these just need to be picked
Some
up
of
in
these
the
need to be
appropriate
picked up
chapter,
later,
they're really
yeah.
not.
And they're already addressed, some of them, you know, yeah.
Right.
Okay.
Need for affordable housing, stop using variances. And then this one is a new one. It wasn't in earlier, so I put it in a couple days ago. Reform town government, hire a town planner to oversee planning and zoning. We can talk about that in the governance chapter. Hire a town manager. Assign one member of town board to integrate the resources of committees into active work and problem solvers. So that's when we can put into government. And then provide management training to the town board, leaders that know how to listen, engage consultants, delegate authority. And then have monthly New England style town meetings with a facilitator to discuss issues of concern to the community. So those are kind of governance issues that we'll circle back to when we get to that chapter. Then the fourth comment on here, the fourth guiding principle was about motivating and enabling upcoming generations to be part of the island's future. And that got a mix of circles, including its governance through education, economic development, housing efforts, and by encouraging early involvement in municipal operations and the volunteer work of local boards, committees, and services. Shelter Island's history and sense of community is strengthened by providing a future on the island to the children who have grown up, summered, or who have family roots here. But nobody really said why there's a mix of circles, so I don't know if they trickled down or if they're intended for that objective.
Right. We discussed this fairly in depth, when we developed this chapter. I felt like this was it was important to the membership at large. That's my memory.
Does anyone see how that could be a
Problem?
problematic?
It's like Civics 101.
No, it's something that we want to foster in this community,
Yeah.
volunteerism and neighborliness and stuff like that. I don't
Yeah.
know, perhaps people could feel differently. We can reach back out and try to get clarification on that.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
All right, so for now, we'll leave that be.
It seems like a lot of those comments with regard to the vision statement are really mostly focusing on concrete action plans that appear later. They just want to make sure those get mentioned or included.
Right. And Meg, the sticky note?
The sticky note says the island needs a full environmental review before adopting any new comp plan.
Noted.
So yeah, just like making sure that you have this great list here that was,
Yeah, I made a
Written
note
down,
for
making
future
sure.
chapters, so I'm gonna go through and pull them out when we get to each
Reshuffle.
reshuffle, exactly. All right, did anybody have chapters comments about the first chapter when they went through it? Did any of you pick anything up? Joanne had a note about including a comment that in 2023, when we first got started, no, 2020, I'm sorry. Don't look at the screen too much, you might get dizzy. That when we first started the process, it was right before all the COVID lockdown started, so a lot of our meetings had to be virtual. So her recommendation was that we add in something about the virtual meetings and just that we got started right before COVID lockdown, so it was a different type of interaction with the public.
here. She made note, I figured.
She made notes, so I'll add that in, yeah. Okay, other than that, I think,
Like comment, I didn't have any specific chapter one, but overall, just for the review and editing process, I think I put an online comment on this one. But if we could put line numbers on each chapter, it would make
Yeah.
it so much easier to get those specific comments in. Instead of trying to vaguely say which paragraph, you put the line, you know what I'm talking about, the line numbers on the side.
Yeah.
You could say chapter one, line number, 328. And it just,
Right there.
it will make reviewing, and I'm sure with the consultants, the consolidation a lot easier.
Meg, do you want to dive in now to the online comments that have been received since?
Yeah.
On this
the
draft?
first one I have for the vision statement is, what do you mean by more equitable and livable community? But I don't see that on there, so the content is in the chapter itself.
At the end of the first paragraph.
Thank you.
Page 2, sorry.
The green page?
The green page, yeah.
Thank you.
See, sort of line numbers would be helpful.
Oh, I see.
Where is it? I'm sorry, I'm just trying to find
The
it.
first paragraph, the last part of the first paragraph. In essence, the document serves as a roadmap to help Shelter Island become a more sustainable, equitable, and livable community.
Mr. goals, it's not to say we're not equitable and we're not sustainable and we're not livable. It's not to say that. It's to say, keep working on it, keep improving that. That's how I read that sentence.
Yeah, it's hard to quantify, but again, we're talking about kind of introduction and vision. But I mean, it's important when we say that we do need to be able to explain, which hopefully the rest of the chapter should explain what exactly we mean by sustainable, equitable, and livable.
Right.
The rest of the chapter doesn't answer that, then
Unless there's some word other than become.
Right.
Right, that'd be better.
Right.
Right. There's poorly worded, but could be fixed.
Maybe
Keep working.
remain?
Yeah, remain,
Remain
or,
a sustainable,
yeah.
equitable, and livable community.
Well, then that implies we are, so you might
Yeah.
push back on that.
right. So to continue to strive, and that can be cleaned up by somebody.
I like that.
Continue to strive. Be a. It's awkward, but somebody else could take it. Tense is right.
discuss it now.
Yeah. All right.
To strive to.
Mm.
Okay. All right, that was the only comment I had on the vision statement online.
Yeah.
All right, I'm going to chapter 2. Demographics. So the first comment is on the year-round population, and it's regarding the fact that it was a COVID year, so it's anomalous. Like, we know it's probably higher than the average year before or after COVID, but it is the strongest data we have because it is the census. It's hard to figure out if that number has dropped significantly or not. I mean, I think more people stayed after COVID than left.
And there's a bit of a discussion in this chapter about the school gives us some indication that some people came here for COVID and left after COVID.
Right.
But, to quantify that without a census,
It's going to be close to impossible to actually do.
Sometimes what you just simply have to do is acknowledge that the statistics are skewed because of those 2 years.
yeah.
Yeah. And I
But
do,
it's said over and over again. I think
yeah.
consultants have done a good job restating that every time you read about it, about those.
Yeah, I was actually pretty impressed with the demographics and the estimation and, going through official data for the census, you look at the school enrollment, they even bounce off PSEG's, usage, and all was right about the same number. I understand it could be inflated because of COVID, but it is what it is, until we update this again and we get more data.
The trouble is the data is always changing, so it's a moving target. It just-
We have to use what we have.
Right. And the trends are kind of the trends. They're consistent there. So for number 2, so Shelter Island experiences significant population boom during the summer months, and then someone added now spring, summer, and fall. The summer months kind of extend beyond, we do understand that. And then 2020 all seasons, it's COVID. So for number 2, the comment was that the comp plan should recognize the problems inherent in housing large numbers of seasonal employees and require employers to do so in a safe, ethical manner. Now, background in housing. And then there's comments that the plan lacks data, which I would disagree with. I think we have a significant amount.
I think a lot of people did take the time to look at the data. I mean, it was very extensive, and it is like, we're used to sound bites, and that's not a sound bite information. That's like, you've got to sit down and study it.
Yeah.
So I
And we
think
pulled data.
people had the time, they would look at it,
sources.
and they would come away with a better feeling about our data.
Or their view is like, well, but what about 2023? Or, which a lot of that stuff you really just don't have access to in a meaningful way. But people want what's happening now it could be an impetus too.
Well, and we need to pick a benchmark and work from that time. And since the census was 2020, that's where we're going to have more reliable data.
And I have to say, throughout the process when we were doing this again in real time as opposed to, looking back at a draft, we were often criticized for using ACS data because it wasn't real and we should use the census. So I think in the community, there's a fair, good division between, what is somebody finds acceptable and somebody else does not, and vice versa. So,
I mean, sometimes you can deal with that by just simply having a brief paragraph explaining sources of data,
the glitches,
years, the challenges of finding data in a moving target and interpreting them in ways that are helpful.
I think the consultants did do a good job of laying that out in the chapter itself.
Yeah, I think we tried to do that and be explicit about what the limitations of the data that's there. I mean, there's a very small sample size, and that really prevents us from kind of looking into it. Just presents a lot of issues in both the ACS and the full census. It's a limited sample size, and there's only so much you can do with it with statistical significance.
Right.
At the same time, it's good to have it there, and consistency in terms of the measuring instruments might be helpful too, just to make sure we're not switching them around.
Yeah.
I just wanted to mention that the ACS has some data that the census, the full census doesn't have. So, we had to be strategic and because we wanted to be able to address some topics that the decennial census didn't address. So we did have to kind of bounce back and forth sometimes, but we acknowledged wherever we did, we tried to be explicit about, why we use that data source.
There was one note on here that there's insufficient data on poverty, and some of the data is outdated. So I did reach out to CAS to get some of their numbers on how many families use the service, how many seniors use the service, reach out to the food pantry and see if they have numbers on how many people use them as well, and talking to some people in the community who have connections to just kind of try to get a better understanding of the numbers that we're working with, so that we can kind of have a more comprehensive poverty commentary in here. Because there is a need and we want to make sure that we capture it.
It's mentioned up there, but I'm not sure it comes up again, and it might be worth including us.
and the online comments too, it's a big,
Well, and someone spoke about that.
I think it's the same person.
Yeah.
So,
She included it, and it comes up in the quality of life chapter. So that's where we'll really kind of dig into it more. And hopefully by then I'll have my responses from past and from the other people that I've reached out to. There's a comment that, the community is not as seasonal as it used to be. And I would say that's true, but we're still very seasonal. The population today is not what it was in August.
otherwise all the restaurants would stay open.
That's true. But there are more people who I think come out on regular weekends and, spend good amounts of time here.
That's true across the East End.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a trend that we're like, see, developing. Just someone recommended changing attracting to developing more singles and empty nesters, but I'm not growing those.
Here's another comment, Meg. Begin to consider closing of the upper school that is not the purview.
Oh, that's outside of the town's
Yes, outside of our
jurisdiction.
jurisdiction, so. School board.
Shelter Island has become, let's say, and many starting businesses or buying and running and having families.
Shelter Island has become more diverse. It's become more, and many more starting businesses, yeah,
Or buying and owning and having families.
great. So the argument being that we're not losing year-round population to a house.
Okay, so yeah, I was having trouble reading it.
Yeah.
And then there seems to be, other than that, I feel like begin
That's the
to
upper school.
consider closing the upper school. Go back 5 years and get data. We've done that.
It's at 50,
That's 50 years.
50 years, no?
Oh, I read it as a percentage, 50 years. School enrollment is outside of our, go back 50 years, yeah.
Didn't Dr. Bolger give us new data that was not included in the initial plan?
Did.
Is a higher population than we initially thought.
Right, and.
But that wasn't included, so the public really didn't see that number.
Yeah,
Right. It's here, I did add it into the chapter, so it's here. The pre-K 12 student population last year was 188, and this year it's 190. So our school population's actually increased from last year to this year. And so he goes on to say a little bit more, so we'll update that data.
there is a problem inherent with school data. The New York State has different, sometimes they include the pre-K, sometimes not, depending on what site you're looking at. And the other thing is you can have one number, especially the small number, one number in September, a different number in January, a different number in June.
Sure.
Because people move.
Yep.
So it's going to be within 1 or 2 or 4 heads.
Really what you're looking for is the trend.
The trend.
not the Precise numbers.
Okay, so that comment from Brian Dolger on the
Yeah.
population was the only comment we received on growth and change in demographics
Well,
online.
there was one, but I think it's the second to last page on our comments spreadsheet. 10/3/23, Natasha Stowe. Demographic trends, and this is I think the same person, disturbing increase in poverty. So
Yes, yeah, I have her comment kind of tagged for the chapter.
yeah.
Okay. When you guys went through the chapter, did you have any additional things that you noticed? Next one I've got. Built environment. So the comments we got on this one. People were concerned about fertilizers and pesticides used on the golf course for Gardner's Bay. And there's a comment that we should do our best to preserve the open space on Nostrum Parkway. There's that like 40-acre parcel. And then someone else commented that they're worried about the use of water by businesses in residential areas. They use a disproportionate amount of water and don't pay for it. Those were the comments we received on the board.
Yeah. Not hard to say what to do with that. I do believe the Nostrum Parkway, however, property is on CPF's targeted list.
Yeah.
So should it come to market, it would be.
Yeah. And then the fertilizers and pesticides is addressed in the natural environment
Yeah.
chapter.
Yep.
And there's more comments on that. As is water usage.
I'm a little confused. How could a business pay for water if they have a well?
Right, they don't. So they would only pay for water if they're on a,
One of the,
Water.
yes, correct.
so I mean.
But the same could be true, a personal property owner could be like filling their pool every other week.
Where is they say there's an arrow.
Just was
Pointing to.
It looks like it's just sort of,
Yeah, so it's not the West Neck or it's not the,
it looks like it's that B zone of the Island Boatyard.
oh,
Because
okay.
it's kind of, that's the direction it's coming from. Which is, it's a shallow water area.
Yeah.
So I understand that concern.
It says of businesses in residential areas, that is zoned B business, the Island Boatyard, just to point everybody out, that when zoning was established, I believe.
And the reason why all that acreage is with that property, they tried to develop it with housing and a hotel initially,
Right.
but there was not enough water, so
Yeah.
that was denied. And
Right.
that's water, that is all surface catching area, I guess you will,
Yeah.
for water.
Recharge.
So, recharge, so,
As much as you can with
Yeah.
the shallow,
right, so they have, in a sense, a right to whatever they can catch.
yeah.
Okay. Now, Joanne had a comment on this chapter. She was confused as to what the maximum potential build out could be. Is there a way to provide a range? Is it 133 properties or 500 properties? Noah, do you have any insight to that?
Yeah, we did a build out. We did a whole build out analysis. It's in this section, right? I think
It's on page 29.
So I'm not sure why Joanne was confused. Let's see. Yeah.
Right. So here we looked at the vacant lots. We looked at lots that could reasonably be subdividable. So, larger lots, and then so we kind of divided those into the kind of the net number of lots that you can get out of it, and other subdividable lots. So those were there were some kind of special case situations I seem to remember that kind of didn't fall under the traditional single family lots. And so I guess we got to 530 total lots that could be created. And that's a maximum. That I think that's very unlikely, to happen. So, typically in a 10-year build out period, we might say that 10 or it's reasonable for 10 or 15% to be built. So the number would be much less than that, I would say, in the next 10 years, but this is just the total maximum.
Okay.
But would this be something we'd want to actually address, that we would recommend, or we would a 10 to 50% build out, or something along that lines? Because I know zoning was a big issue for many.
Right.
Overdevelopment seemed to come up again and again.
Right. I mean, this calculation assumes current zoning. So,
And there isn't much change to zoning,
right.
especially in this area, so it's pretty, the only thing that I would say is that one of the recommendations further on, or I don't think it's in this chapter, is that for major subdivisions, we increase the required amount that's set aside. That is one way to reduce this number. So if you have to, we do 10% now, Southwell does 30%. And so if we require 30%, that reduces the number of lots that potentially could be built.
Right.
That's one way to do it, but.
But yeah, so I mean, that's the build out, is the potential for 530 buildable parcels. Did anybody else have anything on this?
Do we want to read all the?
A few comments for
Yeah.
zoning in general.
Well, see, okay, so just on that board. So now it's gonna go to this board, because this is where it's really gets meaty.
Well, I just want to respond to Wendy's thing, I wouldn't say anything to that number. I would just leave it there, it's just knowledge to have.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't touch, I don't know.
Well, I mean, the only way to to stop people from being able to use their property would be to either purchase it from them, or you can't spot up zone just because you haven't, that would be really complicated. I don't think that would be.
Taking.
It's, taking. So I think by putting in additional restrictions in subdivision policies, like BJ was saying, setting more aside for open space, things like that, you can effectively reduce that number. But you have to also kind of think that some of those people are going to like having that larger property all to themselves and won't want to subdivide.
Right, I think that's what Noah's point was. It's doable.
Right.
There are these properties, 6, 7, 8 acre properties that certainly could be, even though they have a house. But you include them, but not likely. So.
Well, and it
That's what I
also,
was saying, it's sort of your max,
Yeah.
not likely.
well, and also because some of those properties that are counted as potentially subdividable may not be, because we couldn't go through every deed and see if there's a CNR that restricts it from further subdivision. There were a few that we knew of that we accounted for, but we couldn't pull every deed and do a property search that way. It's just too complicated.
And
So-
and you probably have a sense of how many subdivisions that have occurred in the last 10 years. I
Mhm.
imagine it's not a significant amount.
What could it be?
Four.
I was gonna say 5, 3 to 5, so. there you
Yeah.
go.
Right, so that gives you some sense of, and there were more properties to subdivide in the last 10 years than there are, moving forward. So it's not going to be a huge number. There are people living on those properties that would probably want to continue to have their homes. It's, I would say you might get, one here or there, but it's not going to be a major number. Just kind of roughly speaking, it's, I would say vacant properties are kind of probably more, there's more of an opportunity on vacant sites than there are with subdividable sites.
It's just interesting, on the planning board for the last 15 years, we had 3 major subdivisions. All 3 of you have been purchased by the town and county, and one is yet to be, it's empty, there's no houses on it, it just is sitting there. So the trend is not necessarily that, okay, you divide the land, you maybe have 4 or 5 lots, or maybe you have 6, but they're not being utilized as building right away. We have the very large Outlook development, it's all empty houses, it's all empty lots, because the owner hasn't decided to sell them yet. So they've been sitting there, that's been sitting there for almost 22 years,
Right.
Yeah.
open land. So how that will change, I don't know in the future, but
I guess that's what people are concerned about. It's the potential for it to get built upon.
Yeah.
And as people retire or move someplace else and they have a big lot, they might say, well, I can get more money if I
right.
sell it as subdivision than if I just sell the entire thing as one house.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, a deterrent to that is the long and arduous subdivision process.
And
It
expensive.
takes like years, 2 to 3 years sometimes to complete a subdivision.
No. 5, 6,
It's
and
really-
22, so it takes a long time,
Yeah, it takes a while. It takes a while.
it's not short.
All right, on to key findings.
Well, Sean had.
No,
Sean had-
Oh, you
let's
had-
go through this first.
Okay, sorry. Which were you looking at?
No, he's saying do this first. Do
No, you can go through the board.
Wait, are we
I'll
still,
take-
still in this chapter 3?
Yes.
Still in chapter.
Okay, good, all right.
Because we have
That
a,
was just the map. This is the actual board, yeah.
Okay.
It's like, it seemed a little light, right?
Really?
All right. There seems to be universal approval for the first 2. Zoning has controlled overall growth and promoted rural land use pattern. Most developed areas are used for single-family residential homes. There's not a lot of comment on there. Commercial areas are limited. And then the comment that we have for this one is keep options for 114 commercial use, housing, and retail. So they don't want that to be restricted. This one sort of goes with the commercial area. Change B1 zoning in the center to, I can't see what that says.
Rental.
I can't see, something area of start growth for rental and housing, and walkable area provide design standards for light industrial in the business zone, develop
bait.
abatement standards for the nearshore overlay restoration of the full 75 feet vegetative buffer. And that comment was written over someone else's comment that says no spot zoning for areas in the nearshore overlay.
Yeah.
And then maintain the residential area of the center, which it has been for 50 years. Do not put
Every project.
every project people don't want in their neighborhood in the center, such as apartments and workforce housing, water systems, and rampant industrial businesses that spoil the center. There should be an industrial zone not here in the center of town, possibly at the landfill.
So I guess there's concern that it's just going to be nothing but businesses where there, right now, it really is quite mixed.
Blend of residential and
Things such as
Businesses.
apartments and workforce housing. So it seems to me that the comp plan is really trying to keep a mixed use in the center by the second floor, incorporating the housing plan, which incorporates second floor apartments if and when, that's possible.
Or maybe that just needs to be emphasized or acknowledged in some of these.
Right.
Okay.
There
Um,
were, Meg, can I, at the public
Oh,
meeting?
yeah,
I just want to mention that a lot of people came up and people were throwing around the term spot zoning. And I just wanted to kind of clarify that, for the CPAC, I don't know if everyone is familiar with what spot zoning is and what it isn't. But spot zoning generally refers to when you have a zoning that's kind of inconsistent with the surrounding areas and, something that looks off. You have a residential area, then you have one parcel that looks a little different and there's no real rhyme or reason to why that is. However, if you have a comprehensive plan that identifies a rationale for why the zoning should be different in a certain area, even if it is one parcel, it's not spot zoning. There's a rationale, there's, kind of there are principles that are established in the comprehensive plan, so the zoning is consistent with that. So I just wanted to kind of clarify that if it's not clear.
Thank you, Noah. There we go.
So would it be the planning board that would make that determination? You could,
Well, the town board, the town board is really the determines the zoning, and they would implement the comprehensive plan. So spot zoning is just kind of, I don't know, it's kind of an informal, I guess, term.
it's clearly a hot button.
Spot zoning refers to the rezoning of a parcel of land to a use category different from the surrounding area, usually to benefit a single owner or a single development interest.
Right.
The size of the parcel is relevant but not determinative. Illegal spot zoning occurs when the change is other than a part of a well-considered comprehensive plan and calculated to serve the general welfare of the community.
Right. The
And
key
my
is
interpretation-
other than
So
a
this is coming out of the
comprehensive-
New York State zoning,
Right.
which
But it-
we've been giving.
Right. But
So-
if it's considered as part of a comprehensive
Please.
plan, it's not spot
Please,
zoning.
Lily, stop, because it interferes with the microphones.
So from this, what they're saying, if it's in support of the general community good, it's not spot zoning.
Right.
And that has to be justifiable.
Right.
It might be hard to sell, though.
Like if you're gonna change the zoning to benefit, one particular interest or something like that, that's, the definition of spot zoning. I think it's, the terms of misuse is what,
Noah said too.
Noah's saying.
Then this is what happened with the marinas when they were designated as business. They're just those little properties surrounded by residential zoning. This is, we already have this on Shelter Island to a certain extent. Benefited one business, but did it benefit the island as a whole? I would argue yes. Preserves the historical industry
Yeah,
here.
so what you're referring to is, on this map, where you have, B zone here, B zone here, just kind of in selected areas, like B zone here, just pockets. But here we have, this is not spot zoning, this is
It's actually-
actual, yeah.
And I'm not suggesting that spot zoning, that's really a good thing. I don't think it's the best practice by
Right.
any means.
Right.
But,
And I don't know where
That's
we
normal.
recommend.
And
Yeah,
any community that if you look at the zoning map, there are always going to be, pockets of different zoning areas to reflect, the uses that are there or the need or so on. So long as it's based on a well-reasoned plan and also is consistent with, existing uses, so long as you don't change something kind of arbitrarily that isn't really, doesn't have a cohesive framework that's based on a comprehensive plan.
right.
This is my ignorance, but does that have to go through like a public hearing, or it's a big, long process to get this approved?
Have a full public hearing process because you're changing the code.
So the neighbors could come and say, this is really not in the
Absolutely.
interest of everyone, it's just,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Yeah, any zoning changes that happen after this would certainly, would have to go through a public hearing process, seeker, and the whole, the whole process.
Yeah. All right.
So needless to say, the plan doesn't recommend spot zoning.
Right.
That's the conclusion.
When I think some people are confused by the marina idea that we might do, the town might consider in the future changing those from marinas from business to marina. And I don't think people were aware that they were already business zones. And this was a narrowing of the possibilities, not an expansion.
That could make sense.
yeah, That was one of the things where I had not seen before until the draft.
Yes.
So we didn't have a chance to talk about what's the intent with that.
Yes, I think that
Because
language
typically
has.
a marine zoning would be less regulations to, well, different. I don't want to say less, but it would be different to accommodate, obviously, it's more environmentally sensitive areas. So waste discharge and stuff will have to be different. But as far as setbacks to the water, I mean, that's obvious.
Right.
You know, that would have to be less strict. So
Yeah,
I don't know, we haven't had a chance to talk about it.
no, we'll get there, but that language does have to be tightened up.
But there was a discussion in it about the Sylvester Manor be a special zone. And so, and we are talking about a special historical district or zone in the Heights. So that word's been floated around. It looks like a spot to someone. You can understand the miscommunication.
Yeah,
Well, I think there's concern, especially in the Heights, that this is going to be possibly an open sesame kind of thing where businesses or apartments could pop up with no
Right.
input from neighbors.
Right. Which isn't being recommended. You know, it's not something that the plan is recommending, that kind of change.
So do we say that anywhere? Something even to the effect that, spot zoning or would require an extensive review and, it's not, or something just to, so that the public knows that this isn't
Right.
a backdoor.
But this chapter is really the centerpiece of the entire comprehensive plan.
Yeah.
I mean, this is it. And I think it's one of the only chapters that doesn't have its own goals and objectives. I think that's an issue. I think we need to add the goals and
Yeah.
objectives in there as well.
pull it
Yeah,
in
some of
from.
them will. I
right.
mean, I looked at some of the other comprehensive plans and they have, it's a little bit redundant in some areas.
I don't think that's a
But
problem.
it defines what the zoning's trying to accomplish, which I think is lacking in here.
Yeah,
I think part of the confusion with this chapter too is it's actually an analysis of the existing built environment. So it's not necessarily what we're projecting or recommending going forward, but it's kind of a summary and analysis of what currently exists. And I
Exactly.
think that's where a lot of confusion comes up, because that's kind of the intention of the chapter. So, it might even need to be relabeled as existing built environment land use and zoning, because it kind of defines where we're starting. And then, the housing chapter has housing and building recommendations and the zoning chapter. So I think that's some of the confusion.
Isn't that just maybe the first half of this chapter is current existing, because that's pretty much covers it. But I mean, I'd really like to see, where's the analysis on, is our current zoning effective?
Right.
Where has it worked? Where is it failing us? And what do we need to change in the future to prevent it? I think the certain light industrial businesses in the center of town is a good example of possibly where it, it's failed us.
There's quite a few recommendations at the very last chapter. I mean, in chapter 3, at the very last section of the entire plan, dealing with these issues.
Right.
I mean, one thing that I was thinking we could do, because I tried to not be redundant, or we tried to not be redundant in this chapter, because as was mentioned, the zoning recommendations are kind of captured in individual chapters. But if we had kind of a summary of the different,
Easier for people.
like just like an index with a reference to the page number where those zoning recommendations are made, would that be sufficient? Well, I just don't want to.
That would be helpful, I
A
think.
document that wasn't like overly lengthy, and it's already pretty massive.
what do you think? You'd rather see them in there?
I think possibly a mix. I mean, I would like to see the analysis. I mean, you talk about current state, I'd like to see, a little deeper analysis on
How it's functioning.
on how it's functioning, what direction, hence the goals, like what's the goals of our zonings? We have, I don't know how many exact zones we have off the top of my head. The plan recommends adding new ones. What's the purpose? What's the intent here? What are we trying to accomplish? Especially if we're going to suggest making a new zone, well, why? What are we trying to fix?
And that's really in not this chapter, but in the housing chapter.
Well, there's a whole
Right,
outline.
housing is about housing.
Right.
And this is affecting, so I think
Yeah,
it's,
I understand what
a
you're saying, yeah.
communication issue that it's difficult if it's spread throughout the document, which I know it is.
Right.
Right.
Or it's not communicated clearly enough, I think.
Or
On page 27, you've got the zoning regulations, you've got A through B1.
Yeah, they say what they are.
You get a map.
They say what they are, yeah. But I mean, if you go in the town code, each zone has like a 1 or 2 liner on its general purpose.
to what you're saying, where has zoning failed us? It's this idea of industrial sprinkled throughout. And one of the things we did discuss is perhaps an industrial zone, but we felt that that ship had sailed, that there isn't land. There's no location to put a,
No, I
you know,
understand finding a
yeah,
spot to create a light industrial, but still, there's certain
right,
types of businesses that you don't want right next to someone's house.
yes.
Right.
Yes,
So, whether it's not necessarily making a new zone, but refining the current business zone we have
Yeah.
is an option.
and that's a constant comment here. That's where
Right.
zoning has failed us.
Right,
Right.
You know, in the B zone.
right. And just an honest look at, this is our vision. We've covered the vision, demographics, all that,
Yeah,
does what we have support where we're trying to go? There's some of it that's worked. I think the overlay district has been successful.
yeah,
I think it's just quantifying and communicating kind of where we're at and where we need to go.
Yeah.
Zoning at large.
yeah.
Right.
I really do like that.
But I do think that we do present or at least we tried to present a rationale for a lot of the zoning changes. I mean, I could be wrong on that, but my sense is that, I think we did try, if we're able to reference those areas, or at least just summarize very quickly so it's provided in the land use chapter. It feels like it's more of like an organizational thing than the fact that we haven't included it at all.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. You let me know if when you get to the zoning areas. I mean, zoning just feels like it's a tool, and it's a very important tool. And the comprehensive plan, obviously, zoning is a big part of it. But it's a tool that affects housing, that affects economic development, that affects natural resources. And it seemed more appropriate to discuss zoning as it relates to those topic areas, and not have the whole conversation be just about zoning. It was just easier to discuss, housing issues in the housing chapter.
Right. I do understand that, because then it's in context, but maybe if we have a list at the end of this current built environment land use, and telling you where all the
Exactly.
related zoning
Yeah.
That's the
recommendations
start.
are,
Good idea.
that might help. And then I think,
But I like,
Sean, to your point about discussing what's working and what's not working, we can do that in the context of, economic development or the economy, what's working for us, what's not working for us. And that's kind of where the B1 and the B zone came into play,
Right.
in that that's not working for us. So we have a more thorough discussion about that in that area, and explain why it's not working and why we think there needs to be some kind of modification. I think we probably need to expand that conversation. Because I'm going through like chapter 5, and that's the economic chapter, and that's where it comes into play, the B1 and the B zone. And
So at the end of 3, if you have for further discussion on zoning, see chapters,
right,
4, 5, 6, whatever.
right. For maybe housing related zoning commentaries, see chapter 4. For economic
Or environmental.
or environmental
Yeah.
zoning implications, see chapter 7.
Yeah, at the end of the chapter, one of the major titles is development trends and issues. Maybe I'm missing it. I didn't see any issues brought up.
Okay,
They identified the development trend and the development potential and, the vacant lots, and then
okay.
That's a good
end
point.
chapter.
That's a good point.
It kind of just ended.
That's kind of where I'm like,
I get you. That makes sense.
There are definitely issues. So
and it sets up the rest of the chapter.
Right.
I mean, this is what it's about. These are the big, overall from, and protecting our natural resources to our town's character, safety, economic prosperity.
yeah.
Right. right?
Yeah, we don't have to add, pages and pages and pages of this thing, but
But we can add a summary of the things that are working and the
yeah, we
things
need
that aren't
to clearly
working.
communicate it, or else it's gonna be lost on people.
Right.
And that's not effective.
Yeah, so it discusses the build-out potential and the trends that are leading in whatever
And
direction in
development-wise.
development, but it doesn't explain the things that aren't working to the best of their ability.
Right,
So,
or concerns that people have.
right.
Not everyone's gonna agree on all the issues, but
Yeah,
No, but it's good to list them. So maybe, so B1, another issue that I know people have is pre-existing non-conforming structures, essentially the hotels and pre-existing non-conforming zoning locations. But
and nobody wants to change that.
Nobody wants to
I
change
couldn't
that
find
because-
anybody who said, let's make a
Right.
hotel zone. That's just a non-starter here on Shelter Island.
they don't like it, but they don't want it to be resolved. Because if
Right.
you then create a hotel zone, then
Yeah, they want the hoops. People want the hoops, to jump through before you do anything. So I think because we had a discussion about it, people thought it got in there.
right.
Um,
And then I'm also going to add industrial in residential zones.
Yeah, or even in B zone. I mean, there's some addressing of it, of the mixing in of industrial in terms of standards. Parking in the back, lighting, landscaping, all of that, those suggestions are in here. Noah, do you remember offhand where we have them?
Let me
It's in the
look.
BB1 conversation.
Yeah,
So economy, maybe?
yeah.
Yeah, I think,
yeah, I know the light industrial has been brought up for a long time.
Yeah.
It's a matter of where.
Where, right?
It's in the
I get it, but it
economy
doesn't mean you can't
chapter.
say definitely not here,
Yeah.
Yeah,
Maybe not that.
yeah, you can definitely say, not in double A, but
Right.
it already doesn't happen. It happens in C zone, essentially, C and B.
Yeah, see,
C and B,
and that's where
that's where it shows up.
the town should examine that. I mean, that's the recommendation.
Yeah.
Figure out how to solve this problem. This confuses me on the board. I have to say, development pressure will continue, and it's all negatives.
Because people don't like the concept of development continuing.
It's a summary of key finding. It's, in
Right.
other words, that we have vacancy, vacant parcels, we have subdividability. These are facts. Development pressure doesn't mean development a la Levitt. It just means development. Here's a vacant parcel and a house will be put on it someday. So I don't know if we need to change that word, development, growth. I don't know.
Or maybe something about the way it's worded is upsetting. people.
Yeah.
So development pressure will continue, maybe pressure is the wrong word.
Well, it's actually
It's a
pretty
state-
accurate.
It's a statement of
I think it's
facts.
accurate. I mean,
accurate.
in the next 10 to 20 years,
Could have 500 more homes,
I mean, we don't have to like it, it is what
It
it
is
is.
kind of just a fact.
if you go back 20 years, have we grown in 20 years? Yeah.
Well, and we have surges. Every time something happens, we get a surge out here. So something like 9/11 happens, we had a surge of people come to the island. COVID happened, we had a surge of people come to the island. And every
with
time
somebody
that
about this.
happens, it's a building boom.
and some people stick.
And people retire. People choose those times to make significant changes in their life. And sometimes those changes bring them out to a quieter place where they feel safe. So that tends to happen.
Just don't think anyone wants to see full build out,
Of course not.
Nobody,
which is why it's all
Of
ready.
course not.
Unless it's their
Yeah.
property they're selling, in which case then they don't want you telling them they can't do it.
Right.
nobody in this room wants full build out. Not anybody on this island.
Right.
But
Thank God.
But some build out, some development will happen, right? It's inevitable.
Yeah.
I
And I think this kind of,
So the right words, I
it
mean,
explains it. The growth is possible and likely to accelerate over the next decade because we've had a history of accelerated growth over the last 20 years. So there's a trend and this is capturing that trend. And then as oversized developed parcels are subdivided, we really see maybe one subdivision a year. And smaller homes are replaced by larger ones, that we see far more frequently. But the lack of public water supply and wastewater systems require continued large lot development, meaning that you can't have less than an acre to meet health department setbacks. So, you know, there's that balancing. So you can't necessarily downzone because you still have these things in place. And then, so that lessens more compact growth patterns that are typical in other areas like Levittown, or, you know, you go to other places and you do see a compact growth pattern, which is common. You have, you know, a town center with compact growth, and then it gets more rural until you hit another urban center. So, you know, we live in a weird place where you don't have that organized, here's your little town, and then here's your outlying area. We're all just sort of, you know, spread out.
At the same time, the public has been very much aware of these mega houses going up and how they seem, and so it like appears to be that they just get whatever they ask for.
Right.
I think that's why the people are really concerned about the zoning.
Yeah. Understandably.
Yeah.
I'm reading too much into it, maybe the last sentence, the lack of public water supply and wastewater, it kind of insinuates that
If you had it, you don't, right.
Right, you would have a more
That
compact
sentence is
growth
probably-
it's like a
pattern.
leading
Yeah,
sentence.
that's probably.
Gotcha.
Sure, that
Yeah.
could be cleaned up.
Well, we could actually be redundant again. This is such an important issue where we've said it in another place in this plan. We could say it again here, that such infrastructure is not to be used as an excuse to downzone.
Right, we have that.
We have it
Elsewhere.
Maybe we could say it more than once,
Because we're adding in there that it doesn't matter if we have it, the
right?
current density will remain the same for the
Yeah.
zoning, so it's still the
Right.
zoning that.
Right.
It's not the,
Well, zoning always controls, even if you have infrastructure, it's your zoning that
Right.
determines what you're allowed to do with that property.
Yeah.
But I do think that last sentence is what people
Maybe that's what the
are,
book's like.
yeah.
You know?
Which sentence are we talking about?
For,
Development pressure will continue. That, the second to last paragraph here on key findings.
the very last sentence where it says, the lack of public water supply and wastewater systems requires continued large lot development, lessening more compact growth patterns as are typical in other areas. It is a statement of fact, but it sounds like a recommendation almost to get public water and wastewater to downzone, which is not the intent of the comment. So
Well, it's just a statement of fact.
it is.
It's not
It
an
is. I
argument.
think people misinterpret it.
Well, it's a finding, it's not a recommendation.
Exactly.
So, I mean, it is accurate. The reason why we have the kind of sprawling,
Yeah, large lot development.
right, is because of the lack of infrastructure.
say current infrastructure.
Right, like,
Um,
the current lack of requires continued.
No, I wouldn't do current because then that does imply a potential change.
Which we don't want.
The use of private wells and on-site septic systems require continued large lot development, lessening compact growth patterns.
Yeah,
So defining what we currently have.
Something like that.
I'm not sure it changes much, that meaning. You?
No. But it also doesn't say that, you know, the reason we have it is because of the lack of these things. It's because what we use are private wells and on-site septic
Yes.
systems.
Right.
Yes,
So,
I'm more in favor of that.
yeah,
But I'm in a public, so-called public water area, but the zoning is the zoning.
right.
It doesn't automatically change my zoning.
Right, right. I think people have long thought the Suffolk County Health is backstop to zoning.
Well, and I think actually, well, that's true. It hasn't changed your zoning. Like the heights, people think of the heights and that's high density in the heights. They have water and sewer.
Built that way.
And it was built that way. And it's kind of grandfathered in that way. None of those lots meet their AA zoning requirements. So, you know, that's an area where you have everybody non-conforming because it was built before the zoning. But on West Neck Water District, that hasn't changed your zoning. Like it hasn't changed the way you've built out in that area because you're still conforming to your A zone. I believe your A zone there.
Say.
So that's a good example of where you have a utility that hasn't changed the zoning. Okay. I'll put that in there. All right, what other comments do we have on here that we haven't gone through? So this is a comment on limiting house size. That comes up with regard to the moratorium in, I think, the housing chapter. So that's in the housing chapter. This is in the economics chapter. Proposed zoning changes need to be clear and specific. Yes, we do. So there's some, this one talks about landlords that choose to leave storefronts vacant, and we should find a way to penalize them. So maybe a vacancy tax paid in dollars, or availability of space for artists and uses that benefit the community. So
I love that one.
yeah, I don't know if we touched on that, but that might be something that we want to add in, because we do have a lot of vacant storefronts that aren't benefiting the community at all. So that would probably go in the economy chapter, as that kind of supports these open businesses that we have. So I'm going to make a note right now in that chapter to.
What does kind of make sense if you've got an existing building that's just been empty forever, why build another business when you could have used that one, but someone for some reason, whatever, is just doesn't want to rent it or.
Right.
I hate seeing empty buildings and then they're building a new shopping center right next to
There's
it.
one right there.
You know,
Yeah, it just seems like,
Yeah.
abandoned shopping centers to build new.
exactly.
Yeah.
All right, just so that we touch on that in the economy chapter. And then someone has a comment, this is confusing, are you saying you will limit subdivisions? The language needs to be clarified to be unequivocal, that something,
High density is not beneficial.
high density is not beneficial to our community. Got it.
Again, it's a key finding.
It's a key finding, yeah. Infrastructure always leads to more density. Not necessarily, it's your zoning change that can lead to more density. Create a floating.
And you find some of these answered, again, if you go back to that very final action plan.
Yeah.
Where there are things like, strengthen subdivision ordinance to require land for open space. So, I mean, there's
Right.
a response to that concern, which I think is a total legitimate one.
Yeah, it is absolutely. Because I don't think anybody is looking for high density. This is addressed in, which chapter is that? Which chapter was that in? Oh, it's in 11.
The very final one, yeah, where they have all the collected recommendations.
Okay. Create a floating zone, I'm reading this one because it wasn't in the earlier version. Create a floating zone limited to historic hotels, establishing requirements and rights for these businesses. Stop burning tax dollars on fighting existing non-conforming uses. So that's recommending that we do create a hotel zone for those non-conforming businesses. Which, let's see, which I think has probably more people who are opposed to that opinion than for that opinion. Zoning should be updated to reflect current historical conditions, i.e. hotel hospitality, and should have their own zone. So it's another one who thinks that we should have zones specifically for those pre-existing non-conforming structures.
I mean, what would be the advantage and disadvantage of doing that?
Well, you'd be able to define exactly what they can and can't do.
Right,
You'd
right.
be able to, right now, if they try to do anything other than what they are currently doing, it's either an expansion of use or a change of use or something of that nature, and you have to go to the zoning board. If you're doing any structural changes.
About precisely this kind of issue.
Yeah, it's a constant issue. Because, you know, if you have a new owner who takes over a business and maybe they're just more creative in how they run their business and they're using all the same resources they've always used, but maybe they think about it and go about it in a different way. Some people will look at that and they say, oh, that's a change of use. Is it a change of use or is it just growth? You know, because now you have someone who's running a business slightly differently. So maybe they're, you know, I don't even know what a good example is right now. My brain is tired, but it's really hard to define, you know, where the line is on what's a change of use, what's an expansion, what's growth, what's, so it would help define that better. Because right now we always get into those sticky gray areas. Because they're non-conforming, you know, they're in a residential zone, they don't meet residential standards.
So they kind of can do whatever they want?
No, it's very challenging for them to do anything outside of what they've historically done.
Okay.
So if you've,
So-
yeah, if you've historically served, let's just say 200 dinners of a Saturday night, but you turn tables faster, is that an expansion or is that a growth? Or you have a longer serving period? Is that an expansion or is that growth? And I don't, if it stays the way it is, or you develop a hotel zone with strict
Parameters.
parameters, I still think it's a discussion. It doesn't matter where, to me, where it happens. You know, and it's going to be ongoing and there's no solution. It's just a conversation, takes place each time it gets brought up, each time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's a tricky one. And a lot of people like the fact that anytime a non-conforming business wants to do anything, whether it's paint the outside business or whatever, they have to go and ask for permission because they don't conform. So, you know, it would make sense to just zone them correctly so you don't use a ton of town resources on every review of everything they do. But then the public feels like they won't have a say. Yeah,
If you're that, it would lead to expansion
right.
and get out of control possibly.
And unfortunately, there's been a history with the town letting things slide where people did make a change, and it's unfortunate.
So it's that,
Enforcement issue than it really is the rule of the zoning itself.
yeah.
Or certain bureaucratic members of the town decide that we don't need to do that here, or they choose which ones to do, and that's happened historically. It's not naming names, but it's something that's happened. Oh, we don't need to do it for them. They're good old boys. We'll leave it that way it is. And that's just the way it's been. So it's not right, but it happens.
Right. So if you were to develop a specific zone, it may prevent that from happening. So there's multiple sides to the coin. But I don't know if the plan is ready to recommend one direction or the other with that. So I would just leave it be. Let's see. This one says no consolidation of BB1 zone. No spot zoning in the near shore overlay, no spot zoning. Development must be contained based on availability of scarce resources, especially water. I think that's also referring back to the near shore overlay, keeping development out of the near shore overlay. And I know that the concern with combining the B and B1 zone is that the B zone has a very broad definition of what you're allowed to do in the B zone. And the B1 zone is more restrictive, but the concern is that if you collapse the B1 into the B zone, that would invite industrial uses in some of the open spaces in the
Like
B1
across the
zone.
street.
Right, so we do have open space here. So I think that we need to rethink the BB1 zone
Merger.
and actually put in maybe instead modify the guidelines for B1 to maybe allow mixed-use residential housing options, things like that, but maybe restrict industrial usage in just this center area where it's municipal buildings, the library, but there's still some open space. There's still some businesses that have potential to be renovated with potential apartments above at some point in the future, maybe. Maybe,
You have to be really careful, because I mean, you look at
yeah,
what businesses are coming to Shelter Island to open up full-time, there are very few, it's hard to run a full-time
Yeah.
business here. A lot of them that are thriving are the, you know, the landscaping, you know, the light industrial type service.
Yeah.
So, yep, if you're gonna alter that, you just have to be very careful that
right.
what you might end up with if you don't restrict it properly.
Right, so that's the concern that I was hearing from people when we discussed the merging of B1 and B zone. So maybe B1, because it is really this municipal kind of center, it kind of extends down to the bank and then it comes over to the school. It's this chunk in the middle. For that, maybe open it up a little bit and to allow a few more things, but not allow industrial or light industrial usage, really kind of define exactly what can be in there.
So that's listed in the very back as 5.1.A.
Right.
Do you want to read that, Wendy?
It
Just,
says, consider merging the B and B1
right,
business zones.
so this would be more consider
That's page
redefining.
4 on that final section.
And it's page 60 in the economy chapter. So we can discuss that more thoroughly when we get into that chapter, I think, because it actually talks about like the different setback requirements, like area coverage, things like that. But we can go more into defining usage. I think that what we miss a little bit in here is we don't address use as much as we do the actual parameters of the zoning, the setbacks, the
Yep.
percentage of coverage. So we need to kind of address use in some of these.
In chapter 3, you're talking about.
Yeah. All right. That's all the comments on this board. Did we go through the ones that were,
In the spreadsheet, and
haven't gone through the spreadsheet yet?
almost one on every page, almost.
Yeah, I sorted mine, so I have
Oh, you did?
all
Okay,
of chapter 3 in the.
great.
The first one is within the B zone along 114, particularly outside of the center, Bridge Street and the Heights, new development has been predominantly service yards and service yards with Butler-type buildings. The percentage of lot coverage is close to 100%. These types of light industrial uses are not addressed in zoning code in terms of screening requirements, parking limitations in the front yard, and equipment storage in the front yard. There are no light industrial zones on the island, and many new businesses fall into this category, serving the maintenance and construction industries. The island should acknowledge this condition and develop site design standards to abate the negative visual impacts of this type of development on tourism and surrounding residential properties. And we,
No, well, that's in there, right? Pretty much verbatim, we've addressed that.
yeah,
You know, to say design standards should be
Yeah, I have to
developed.
take a look. I can't tell offhand, but we can look at that.
we do. We discussed design standards in the context of the B and B1 zone.
Yeah.
And since that's where most of this is happening, I think that we do address that. We can look at it more when we get to the economy chapter. And then the island has significant amount of vacant property along 114, the vast majority of which is owned by one landlord that is unable to find and maintain tenants despite favorable business environment. The condition compromises the impression the island makes upon visitors, and the lack of available commercial real estate limits the availability of goods and services on the island. The island needs an approach to address its vacant storefronts along 114. So I think that kind of circles back to that recommendation that's written about somehow they're penalizing landlords who aren't using their space or coming up with some alternative ways of getting them to rent it, use it. Okay. This comment is the same one that Sean kind of brought up. There are no goals listed in the chapter. So we'll
They weren't, yeah, but,
reference.
yeah.
Because this is supposed to be the existing conditions chapter, this land use and zoning. It maybe we should rename it existing built.
Yeah.
I think that would help.
That's a good idea.
And then,
Yeah.
and then we'll reference at the end of the chapter where zoning recommendations for these things can be found.
Good.
All right, let me just add that in here. That might help clear up some confusion, I think.
Yep.
All right. Shelter Island does not have a steep slope ordinance and should adopt one to prevent damage to the island's environment. Steep slope development disturbs the natural course of drainage, large swatches of natural vegetation, and causes stable land masses to be replaced by unstable conditions. I do think we should include this in the natural environment chapter if it isn't already in there.
It's just a zoning thing. I mean, it's a planning issue.
Yeah.
And we actually do have a steep slope guidelines, but we modified them during my tenure on the planning board. And we made it more lenient.
Yeah.
But again, that was for a specific landowner. And it was a perceived benefit to the community. So it's one of those how these things happen, you know?
Yeah. So we'll look into a steep slope ordinance. It's actually something that we were talking about with the moratorium because that was part of the reason for triggering the moratorium is that most of the easy to build areas have been built on. And so now we're coming across more people wanting to build in undesirable locations like steep slopes and banks. Let's see.
Okay, this is kind of redundant.
Yeah, this section indicates that Shelter Island has traditionally been a place that balances property rights and zoning. The accuracy of this statement of balance is questionable. Please drive along 114 in the center and see the type of land development that's taken place. Consider equipment yards. And this is a little redundant. It goes back to we need screening on industrial properties so they're visually appealing.
Yeah, landscape buffers, parking ratios.
Yeah.
Those are all addressed.
And those are all addressed. And another one, concerned about vacant buildings on 114. Would like to see more integration of the arts community in perhaps solving this issue with working with the town. I wish they were town-owned buildings. And then perhaps the arts community could raise money with the town for this, for, I guess, purchasing and taking over some of those properties. Maybe look into grants, see if grants are available.
Great idea.
Yeah. An arts community center would make a lot of sense. It would be good to have an arts advocate as someone to liaise between the arts community and the town with such issues as they crop up. We could come up with some really good creative solutions that are great for the economy and cultural strengths of the island. So that's an interesting recommendation. I kind of like that. Let's see. Excellent details and provides good overview of island areas and those with future potential. I do think that it may need some additional tweaking as some properties are not shown as developable, but could be, such as large parcel before the recycling center going south on right, owned by one of our longtime locals. A note should be made that these figures can and should be updated as required so they remain true. Really nice work. Thanks, Don. But it should be updated every 5 years or whenever we do a review of this, go through the data and update that. So we'll make that a note in the implementation. Recommendation to update the data. All right, I have 4 more. One concern with land use and zoning is that the center district is becoming a place where many projects are being proposed. Sewage treatment, workforce housing, and industrial businesses that truly change its character. The center is also residential and has always been. I don't see enough protections for homeowners in the 114 area as it goes through this major transformation. It is taking on an industrial look and feel. Many large trees have been removed in the last 10 years alone. The center is and has been a seat of government, the school, the library, the church, the cemetery, police, fire department, Legion, community hall, playgrounds, and athletic fields. For the last century, it has had only small businesses with small storefronts. It's a true municipal center. Safeguards and limits could have been put in place in the 90s, but were not. It is my hope that new plan addresses this issue. That is not to say it should look like Front Street in Greenport or Main Street, Sag Harbor, with buildings sharing walls, but address the fact that we have sort of a vacancy, but don't let it get industrialized. Which I think is kind of what we need, that B1 zone, what we've been talking about. What we thought we were doing, but then reading into it, it's like, nope, we're making a mistake with that. So rethinking how we handle B1. Okay. Only two thoughts I have. One pertains to, I'm sure, are many properties that do not meet minimum lot size as pre-existing. I'm assume this makes them non-conforming. Do we indicate that in any way? I'm thinking this is for the map. The second is, does the plan discuss or mention potential for some small townhome development based on land size, i.e. if a 3-acre parcel could support a 6 or 8 townhome complex, each townhome 1,200 square feet plus garage? Our current zoning wouldn't support that.
But we do talk about, with a larger.
For zoning, you can do a house and an accessory, so you could have 6, you couldn't do 8.
Right, but also we do talk about clustering in the plan, that you meet your space requirements, and if you want to leave more of the property open and bring the houses closer on a one parcel,
Right,
that might be doable.
right. And it's actually better
Yeah.
for the environment to leave a larger open space,
Right.
have condensed building in one area.
Right.
For every application for a mansion, large house, or addition to an existing house, especially in the near shore area, the owner should be required to have their well tested for depth, water inventory, quality, et cetera, before a permit is issued. Well, they have to do that anyway with the health department, but is that to create a record for the town? I'm not sure what the intention is, because no matter what, whenever you do construction, you have to have your well tested.
But they're not testing necessarily for volume available. So
Right,
if you were maybe not the near shore, but you were, for example, just say Silver Beach area where there's all shared water there. It is an issue with what would be available.
All of Summer Beach is near shore, just.
Yeah, well, I mean, just beyond that, I just mean it's
Oh,
not
yeah.
not in that area.
right.
And it still has the same potential problem.
Yes.
We don't test for that, we test for potable,
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's interesting. I understand the testing for depth, like the county has a standard that you're supposed to have a 40-foot deep well
Right.
minimum. But in some areas, that doesn't make any sense because you go down 40 feet and you're in salt. So like Silver Beach, for example, a 14-foot well is typical, especially the older wells, they were put in by hand, and that's where the fresh water is. It's shallow. So it really depends on your location on what well is actually going to provide you potable water. I think it would just depend on what the intention is or the purpose of doing that, of collecting that data.
I think they're probably wondering how much the water is going to be used by this new
Right.
homeowner. Are they going to be watering their lawn and filling their pool and doing
Well,
it?
it's regulated elsewhere, so.
Right. So that comes back.
So that just has to be connected then to this.
Yeah, okay. That makes sense.
I
All
think
right.
There's a tree comment, save the trees, but that's addressed by the plan.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's one of the recommendations in the back.
And then the last built environment comment I have on here is, please see my comment in quality section number 9 about historic houses. Should be in zoning section also, like Nantucket, Shelter Islands have a tree warden, a professional arborist who inspects lots before any construction, identifying historic trees, rare specimens, etc., to prevent the cutting down and removal of historic or rare tree specimens. And that is kind of outlined in the tree recommendation on
Can we
environment.
go to that detail though? I just don't.
Actually goes into a decent amount of detail, and there's a subcommittee actually right now working on creating a tree code because right now there is no regulation. So people can clear cut their property when they buy it, and so that upsets a lot of people. So there's actually a committee right now working on that specifically.
And it's in the plan.
The CAC and green options, and so that's included here. All right, so those are all the comments I have for this chapter 3. I think a lot of the work that needs to be done is in the chapters that have the associated zoning codes with them, or zoning changes. So I'm going to say now is a good time to stop since the 8
Before,
o'clock.
I have a,
Yeah.
I sent you an email about this, and I sent BJ, this concerning page 3 of the plan. Some of the language is factually incorrect.
What page,
Oh,
the very
yes.
The
beginning?
actual plan,
Chapter 1,
chapter 3,
chapter 3.
page 23 of the bar graph. Early settlement,
Oh, yes, I have both of your comments.
have my
in there.
comments,
I
that
do.
the Carchog were not here, and they were not tribes, they were
Yep.
family groups. And it goes on that the whole thing about Governor George Willis, he was not involved. He came 50 years later. We're talking about Earl of Sterling, we're talking about James Ferret.
Yep.
There's a lot of changes there. And so you have like, and also there was no whaling on Shelter Island. There were ship owners, 3 ship owners. There were a whole bunch of captains. There were crew, there were mates, but they were not involved. To say Shelter Island was a hub, no.
Right.
They built the boats, they didn't go out.
And they had built, well, I don't even, whaling boats weren't built either, maybe a few, but not of the size that were going. Like Sag Harbor and Greenport was the main port of offloading, so all that shouldn't be there.
Yeah, I have both of your comments in
Thank you.
there for Noah.
That's great, Joe.
Yeah, good catches.
Doesn't look good here. Make it stop it.
We'll fix it, we'll fix it.
It's good history, we don't need any.
Okay, so,
Right. You don't need to embellish
so
it.
that's what I have. Those are all the comments for chapter 3. So did you guys find anything else? If you come up with anything else on the chapter, you're thinking about it later. Let
I
us,
think the most helpful thing will be to add that final for more zoning information C chapter that.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
agree.
And a couple of paragraphs on what's the point here?
right, and changing the heading to existing built conditions, so people aren't expecting it to be something. it's
Right.
not.
Proposal, it's
What's
not.
fair?
Yeah.
Right,
Very important.
See how it looks.
yeah.
Do you have other things on your list?
That's pretty much it.
All right, so I'm going to open it up to the public. Anyone in the room have?
Yes.
Kathleen?
Thank you. I have a comment on the proposed Marina Business District. So there were several last minute zoning changes that had never been discussed that were added into the draft plan in September. And the Marina Business District was one of them. And it refers to the statement in chapter 8, create a marina business zone for the 5 kind of mom and pop marinas around the islands. That's Copp's Harbor, Condon Creek, Clark's, Bridge Street, and the Island Boatyard. So as you guys know, many of us are really concerned about the development threat posed to Shelter Island and especially the shoreline area that's currently protected by the Nearshore Overlay District. And this marina business zone is so poorly and loosely defined that it's going to function like a mandate for zoning changes and an invitation to big developers. So what I'm asking is that you please include language prohibiting the redrawing of the nearshore overlay perimeter or any changes or expansion of use for these 5 areas. And please also consider protection for town landings, which exist in these areas, and potentially a sunset provision for these spot zones. So there's 3 big reasons I think you guys should be really concerned. So firstly, the threat of development is real. So everybody's heard rumors, and we know that Safe Harbor, which was recently acquired in a $2 billion acquisition by a company called Sun Communities, is rolling up or acquiring and consolidating marinas around this East End area. And I just want to point out that the formula for marina consolidators, you add berths, you add commercial activities like restaurants, you build condos, you raise prices, you squeeze out local boaters, you attract the mega yachts, and this is all to, improve your financial returns, okay? We don't have any zoning protections from the impact that this could have other than the nearshore overlay. Second point is all 5 of these locations that are in this marina business zone are at totally vulnerable areas. They're all in the nearshore overlay for good reason. They're all in FEMA, like maximum flood zones. All of them, as far as I know, flood today in a strong nor'easter. All of them, according to the sea level rise maps that were prepared by the previous comprehensive plan consultant, will be inundated with just 18 inches of sea level rise. 3 of the 5 are on Copp's Harbor, which is also vulnerable to real point destruction. And several of them also have town landings for this community. So these 5 locations are like absolutely the worst possible place you'd want to see increased commercial development. And then the third point is that these marinas are kind of in these little grandfathered business zones that you guys have been talking about, and they're sitting in the middle of residential neighborhoods where expansion's a problem. And I'm not, to be clear, we're not worried about the mom and pop folks. They've been nice neighbors, but we're concerned about big multi-billion-dollar corporate developers coming in here. And uses need to be restricted, not expanded because of that. And nuisances from big marinas are pretty well known and documented. So I took a look at the Southampton, East Hampton, and Southold Marina zoning codes, and that kind of lists the problems that you encounter. Pollution from boat sewage and fuel and boat repairs, noise disturbances, water consumption, dredging and other environmentally damaging earthworks, light pollution and dark skies, traffic, screening, and of course, destruction of wetlands and waterways. So Southampton, after a lot of lawsuits, removed specified marina districts from its zoning code, okay? East Hampton did the opposite, and you only need to look at Sag Harbor waterfront to see the result over there. So, what I'm asking here is that the marina business zone is really not in the public interest as it's currently defined in the comprehensive plan. And if we want to see day trip or party zones on Bridge Street or mega yachts at Public Harbor or condos at the Island Boatyard, and if we don't want to see those things, we need to really revise the language in Chapter 8, this marina business zone, to sustain the nearshore overlay, protect it, prohibit expansion and changes of use, and protect town landings for residents in these 5 marina locations. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I notice a lot of this is also on the recommendation boards. So when we get to Chapter 8,
Yeah.
that's good information to have.
And it would be helpful if we could just do 1 through 3, although I know that's zoning, so I'm not saying.
I have a brief comment. Lily Hoffman. I have basically 2 questions about the September 23rd public meeting. First, how are you going to use the written and spoken findings and the dot findings? I'm not even going to talk about the legitimacy of red and green dots, but how is it going to be used? Which ones will you use? Which ones will you put aside? This is basically the question. And on what basis will these decisions be made? I was a little perturbed to hear the discussion of spot zoning tonight. It seems like many, many comments. I went through the nice script you provided on the summary of the comments and the dot findings, and many, many comments pertain to spot zoning. Sean tried to focus on the issue, but our consultant, Noah, seemed to dismiss this in a relatively self-serving definition of what spot zoning was, which didn't apply to the situations he says on Shelter Island. So how are decisions going to be made about the comments, the dots, the criticisms that are gotten in as to what will appear in the plan and what will not? And my second question, which is really, I guess, the crucial question for me, would be, when will we get to see a revised draft of the plan, when it will be available for us to read? And secondly, will we, the public, be able to have an opportunity to comment on the revised plan? Thank you.
Essentially, the process that we've been going through tonight,
This evening.
commenting and discussing these, is how we're going to go about making the changes to the document and the revisions. The revision will be done when we're done going through all the chapters.
The comments.
And the comments and the recommendations and having these discussions and making edits to the document. So however long that takes is however long that takes. And then the consultants will make those changes that we give them and from what they've heard here. And when that document draft is complete, then it'll go back out to the public. So I don't have a date or a time for you, but that's the process that we're going through.
I agree, the red and the green dots, there were sightings of people just taking a whole bunch of red dots and standing there and defeating the purpose of the whole exercise by doing that. Just because you feel strongly about something doesn't mean your feeling should count more than once per item, but okay. So they're a grain of salt here, I think, with the dots. You know, we see them, we see the comments next to them, and we're discussing them in an open way. But yes, definitely a grain of salt.
Finding the comments more helpful.
More helpful.
In terms of being able to see what a particular idea is repeated again and again, and you can see what they're concerned about.
And I think when you get like a blend of red and green dots, it tells you, okay, so people are confused. We need to somehow clarify this, or there's something that's not being understood, or people like housing, people are going to feel strongly. It was a 50-50 split in the vote. So we know that there are people who are for housing, people who are against housing. So it's always going to be that way. And it's just going to be how we decide in the end to present it to the public.
Yeah.
I think we're going slowly enough, which is okay. So I don't envision this report being done next week.
No,
So I think that it's going to take time.
We've just set up 3 meetings, the 17th, the 20th, and the 23rd. So in the next week, we've just done, reviewed 3 chapters out of.
2 of them were easy ones.
And they were the
Yeah, I know,
easy
they were the
chapters.
easy
They were
ones.
warming up.
And I think we've worked to see the process that, I mean, I will say, Coco, you did a great job of, she created a document of reading every one of those.
Oh, that's Emily.
comments.
That was Emily, that was the
Oh, Emily, okay,
consultants.
sorry, the consultants, of reading each one of these things and typing them up so that we could see them this way. We're trying to read them off the board to show that we're acknowledging everyone's comments and dots. And
And some people came in after the hearing and wrote additional comments. So we want to make sure we don't miss any. That's why we have this here. We have our paper in front of us. We're cross-referencing because I do know that, you know, someone rudely wrote over someone else's comment, but there are new comments on here. So, you know, we're trying to make sure we cover all of them.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah,
Come on up, come on
come on
up.
up.
Say who you are, say who you are.
My name's Ellen Davis. Hi, thank you.
Thank you.
I just want to ask a question about process. So I heard you go through all the comments, which I think everybody appreciates, but what I'm not understanding, and maybe I'm just not connecting the dots, is what the process will be in terms of incorporating the comments, not to suggest that you're going to adopt every single one of them, but how you, it's sort of putting a finer point, I think, on what Lily was saying was, so I heard you read them all. It was a regurgitation of them, but what I didn't hear was how that feedback is going to be incorporated.
But I think we've been
And so that's my
taking
question.
notes, right?
Yeah, we've been taking notes, and also these initial chapters don't have recommendations with them. They're not significant recommendations. So, you know, the things that we were going through here is what in the language was not either people were disagreeing with or what was confusing and how could we clarify it. So we made some clarifications, we made some adjustments on the language that currently exists in these chapters 1 through 3 so far. But there are no real recommendations in these chapters. So when it gets to housing, there are recommendations that we'll go over and will modify or eliminate or adjust based on the comments that we've received and the discussions that we have. But these 3 chapters just don't have recommendations associated with them.
Although I think you've already made note of a couple
But
of the
like, even as
recommendations that might
related
be
to the
changed.
zoning, the consultant, whose name I know of.
Noah.
It just seemed extremely dismissive to me. That's how it came off, particularly about the zoning. I heard an arrogant dismissiveness in his tone, which was my experience of him at the open meeting. And I guess I'm just a little concerned to understand whether this is a process by which you can say, we acknowledged every comment, we listened to it, but we're still doing what we're doing. Or if any of this will have any meaningful impact when you do get to the chapters where you're actually taking action.
No, I think it will absolutely have a meaningful impact, but I think what
Not
you heard
everyone, though.
today was the fact that people are misusing the term spot zoning. So it was a conversation about the definition of spot zoning, and that spot zoning is not what's being recommended in the plan in any of these recommendations. But it's it's being misunderstood or misused by the public, and it is expressing a fear of spot zoning. So a fear that if we were to, for example, create a hotel district to just spot zone those hotels is now compliant where they're currently, non-conforming, that someone might feel is spot zoning. So I think that's what Noah was discussing. I mean, Sean read the definition of spot zoning from the zoning manual, which explains, like, let's say we just randomly take a lot over there and say, that's gonna be a McDonald's, we're gonna spot zone that commercial, it's in the middle of a neighborhood. Well, that doesn't make sense. And so what Noah was explaining is that something like that wouldn't make sense. That would be spot zoning to benefit that one person. None of the things that we're really recommending in here are spot zoning because they're not totally out of context. They don't make sense. So, I understand people look at the Sylvester Manor suggestion and think that's spot zoning. Well, they're also a large, unique complex, and they have a comprehensive plan of their own. So it makes sense for the town to consider what their long-term planning are, since they're such a large portion of the center of town, and that will have an impact on all their neighbors. So to say, we want to see your comprehensive plan and we want to make sure that it's developed within the guidelines of current zoning, sort of, that's where that recommendation came from. It's not necessarily to spot zone Sylvester Manor or something other than what it currently is. So I think some of the confusion is just a misuse of the term.
And I'm really sorry that you felt
You're
that way
muted,
about
Noah.
Noah. He's not, I just think I know him, he's not that guy. I'm sorry, the tone. No, I'm just sorry that tone, sorry.
And it wasn't the first time it came across.
Yeah, no, I'm just sorry about
So,
Can I jump in?
Yeah.
Well, obviously I apologize if I came off as arrogant. That's certainly not what I intended.
Yeah.
I just remember at the meeting, a lot of people came to me and were saying, just mentioning that word, spot zoning. And when we talked about it, and I had multiple conversations about it, what they explained to me, what they thought spot zoning wasn't what I understand it to be as a planner, and it's kind of a commonly understood term. And so I was kind of relaying my experience at the meeting. I had conversations and we talked about it, and I explained what that term was, and a number of people said, "Oh, okay, I didn't understand that." If there is an issue with the zoning policy that we're recommending, that's one thing. But the idea that it's spot zoning specifically, just that term, is what I just kind of rubbed against, because I was just concerned that people were throwing out a term that wasn't accurate, and I just wanted to clear the air, just to make sure that we're all talking about the same thing. So anyways, I apologize if that came off as arrogant. I guess I was just trying to clarify an issue, but maybe it came across the wrong way.
Thanks, Noah.
It's always tough on Zoom.
It is. It's like text messaging. Never get the right. Yes?
Good evening. My name is Joel Hoffman. I don't think there's a problem of semantics. I don't think spot zoning is an issue per se. I think there's a concern, at least on the part of some in the community, that although the words are all about preserving the unique character of this incredibly wonderful isle, which is unlike any place else on the East Coast, maybe America, I don't know. But even though the words are preserving the character, nature of this place, we fear the gathering storm, the pressure of development. And there's anxiety, not about spot zoning or any other single word. I don't want to get lost in this little, really little matters of definition, but rather we know what's happening, forces gathering on the East End, the North Fork, and maybe most of on Shelter Island, because this is the most beautiful and precious part of the East End. And we're scared about that. And we worry that even though the wording is all about protection and preservation, that it's not actually built in to the comprehensive plan. So there are going to be 3 more public meetings on that.
Oh, no, there's no number.
What?
There's no number.
Probably more than that.
Okay,
It'll be more than that. Yeah, oh, yeah. Yeah, there's no number.
Public meetings, and then there's going to be a final draft proposal presented to the public. After that, there's going to be a public meeting at which the draft proposal is presented. What will be my ability to speak up and bring about further change in that plan if I don't feel sufficiently protected by the comprehensive plan as it's presented in that final draft? That's my big question.
That would be the public hearing process.
Well, it's a public hearing process, but what chance will I have to have my concerns incorporated in the final comprehensive plan? That's what I'm concerned about. Not, public hearings are great, but it's what comes out at the end, the actual action that matters.
Okay. All right. I don't know the answer because that'll be up to the board.
Right, so after we're gonna create another draft that we'll go through and then come up with a final thing that will be handed to the town board.
Right.
Then the town board has 2 public hearings. They could, at least, and they could make changes.
Yes.
And based upon public comment. So there is still, we still have a long process to go and more time for public comment as we keep moving forward.
Yeah.
Then, thank you for the clarification. Then the final word is not going to be me and the rest of the public, but rather the town board that will make the decision what the comprehensive plan is. All right, that's
Correct. Yep.
That's required by law. New York State requires the board to vote on it, make that final decision. But that's after hopefully lots of discussion. And hope you don't stop coming to our meetings.
I hope the discussion has effect. That's my concern.
Good.
Anyone else in the audience here? Because then I'm going to go to Zoom. No? All right, Michael Shackton? You're muted,
Hello?
Michael. Hi.
Yes. How's that?
Good.
First of all, I think this was a more.
Why are you there? Cutting out, Michael.
What's that?
You cut out. You start from the beginning.
Okay, can you hear me now? I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Okay, first of all, I'd like to say I think this was one of the more positive meetings that have occurred in a while for 2 reasons. I felt heard.
no.
What's that?
You keep breaking up.
How about now?
Just keep talking.
All right. First of all, I think it was a very positive meeting. I think people were heard, and they were heard, and also that the board acknowledged what people. Besides just producing another draft, and that is within the process for you to explain your rationale for including things and not including things within the plan as you move forward to make changes. That there needs to be some step that talks to the rationale of your committee as to what and why things are being included. The next thing I have to say, because I understand communications from your reactions are difficult. I would like to see this committee and people look back to the 1990 or the current plan, particularly with regard to the discussion which took place about what happens in the center of town, because there was a particularly elegant idea in that previous plan about creating a center and what a center means. And we've made progress this evening by the statement that re-examine B1 versus absorbing B1 into B. That's great. But I really think we need to think carefully about the center as a walkable, smart growth area that has municipal services as well as public services, including retail and residential. Finally, with regard to the analysis that was made about the build out, it has to be acknowledged somewhere that the build out has excluded the residential build out within the B1 zone. I'm sorry, within the B zone. The suggestion that there be residential above businesses is a great suggestion, but I think it should be limited to those areas where it has a collateral benefit. And that is that it can create community and it can create a walkable neighborhood. The idea of putting and I know this isn't your intention, but it is as it is written now, that yes, you can put a residential use above a business use. Just visually marked in my head, and this is a wild ass guess, that there may be 60 acres of B zone. If at 2 dwelling units per acre, that's 120 additional residential units that are not accounted for in the build out. I know this isn't your intention, but I also think there's, I'll say, a strategic way of limiting the amount of additional density in the B zone, and that is to put in some statement with regard to where it qualitatively adds a collateral benefit, and that is in conjunction with smart growth and a walkable area. The 3 smart growth and walkable areas within the community are potentially the center. This is aspirational, potentially Bridge Street and the New York Avenue portion that is, somewhat limited to, the hardware store through where the Cheekwood is. Hopefully you could hear that. If not, I'll send you a note summarizing my comments.
We heard that part, Michael. Thank you. Lori? You're muted, Lori.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
So the question I have actually is about process. Because you had said that the public is allowed to submit written comments up to the deadline, which is 10:15. So I have a 2-part question, and one is, as these discussions continue and things are added and changed and edited, my concern is how the public can continue to submit, whether they're written or verbal comments, if we have a deadline of 10:15. I'm a little confused by that. Could you explain?
Well,
It's just on this draft.
It's just on this draft. The 10:15 deadline is on this current existing draft.
So that we can produce another draft. There has to be some cutoff so that we can actually get another draft done and then start it all over again.
Okay, so it's just on this draft.
Right.
Okay. And then my second question is, is it intended that this committee will review those written comments at some point before it goes to the town board?
On the next draft, you mean? Comments that are made? No.
On the draft, because you've given us a deadline of 10:15. So
Well, that's what we're doing.
Well, the
Right.
goal is to hopefully have everyone's comment in on this current draft by the 15th, so that while we're doing our edits and our review, we're incorporating those comments and we don't miss comments because people have put comments in after the 15th. That's why there's the deadline. So if someone puts in a comment on the first 3 chapters over the weekend, then we'll review that on the 17th at our next meeting, because the 15th was the deadline, today's the 13th, so you still have 2 days for those comments. So we will review those.
But then when the next draft comes out, the whole process starts
that's
over
it.
again. And then you can kind of compare, well, what's changed and why was this?
Hold this up. Can everybody see this?
You can't read it though.
You can't read it, but
It's online.
Lily can tell you. This is a big Excel spreadsheet, and it's all the comments that come from online. So it gets updated, and this is what we read, and you have to print it real big to read it.
But it's online for you to look at too, if you want to. So
Yeah.
it's not kind of hidden.
And so we're taking this, and so as we're sitting here and we're reading, this is what we're reading. We're reading everyone's comments that you have submitted online. And what Meg is doing, and she's reading it, she's making notes back to Noah to say, like, this has already been included. We have noted that. That's a really great idea. Or, this is something that's already handled by the planning board, or the Green Select and Tree Committee is already working on that. This is where we're getting those comments from and where we're acknowledging it. You're just not seeing all of that because this is a work session and we're working on things.
Plus everything on the board as well.
And everything on the board, but when we're talking about these comments that you're sending in, that's where that's all happening. And this document is just a growing piece of data that keeps happening.
I do think we should somehow figure out a way of ensuring that if someone just happens to walk in and walk over to that board and start making a comment, and we've already documented, I don't know how you can mark that or something so you can notice, oh, a new change, because we want to encourage that too, that people have that access.
I think,
So I don't know what
I think you're marking off on here right now.
Maybe
what
we
we've been
should
talking about.
have a box.
Well, I would prefer any new
Separate piece
comments
of
to
paper
go
or
in the
something.
comment box.
But this,
Okay.
this building's getting locked tonight and it's not opening until after the 15th.
But, okay,
So
but
for this, for this
you
round,
say you've observed this, so I'm just saying we want
Yeah.
to make sure we don't miss those.
yeah.
Didn't mean to cut you off, Lori, but just trying to.
Okay,
Did you have-
no, thank you. You've answered my question.
Okay,
Thank you.
all right. Anybody else have a comment? I make a motion that we close the meeting.
Second that motion.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
We'll be back on Tuesday.